The first time a woman in a crisp, blindingly white blouse stood on my land and told me I didn't actually own it, I honestly thought I was being punked. I'm standing there in work boots, coffee in one hand, the air thick with the smell of diesel and cut lumber, and this lady is talking to me about architectural harmony, like I'm a rogue contractor building a skyscraper in a national park. I looked around for the hidden cameras, but all I saw was the Arizona dust kicking up around her designer heels. That was my first real lesson in how ugly power can get. It has this nasty habit of making mediocre people feel like they've been anointed by God himself to police the world. A few years before that, my life had basically imploded. We're talking the full package. Messy divorce, mountain-high piles of paperwork, enough blame to go around, and the kind of long, heavy silences that make you realize your house isn't home anymore. I spent a long time just drifting, living in motels, taking odd electrical jobs, doing small construction gigs, telling myself I was in transition. The truth? I was just a guy with a tool belt and absolutely no idea where he was going. Then I found these 3 acres north of the city. Dry ground, big saguaros, and a view that hit me square in the chest like a second chance at life. From the highest point on that lot, the desert just rolled out in waves of dusty gold, all the way to the horizon. At night, the coyotes would sing. There wasn't a single street light for miles. And for the first time in forever, my phone wasn't blowing up with angry texts or reminders of what I'd lost. It was just silence, space, and a desperate, quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, I could build one honest thing before I got too old to care. I did my due diligence. I wasn't taking any chances. I checked the zoning, the parcel maps, the deed history, the easements. I even had a lawyer confirm the land was strictly private rural use. And most importantly, it was absolutely not part of the nearby master plan community. Once I knew the ground was clean, I sat down and sketched out a simple, one-story ranch house. Metal roof, a wide porch for the sunsets, and a workshop big enough to house my equipment. Nothing flashy, nothing that needed a committee's approval. Just mine. The permits cleared without a hitch, and that first morning of construction, I felt like a kid on Christmas. The trucks rolled in at sunrise, gravel crunching under the tires, the generator humming like a heartbeat. I walked the property with a fresh cup of coffee, mapping out exactly where I'd watched the monsoon storms and where I'd finally stopped feeling like a guest in my own life. Then, she pulled up. Karen West. She stepped out of her SUV like she was an empress arriving to inspect a neglected colony. The blonde bob was stiff. The white blouse had the Homeowners Association emblem embroidered on the pocket like a badge of office, and she was clutching a clipboard against her chest like it was a holy relic. She didn't introduce herself. She announced herself. "I'm Karen West, president of the Sun Mesa Ridge HOA," she said, looking at my framing like it was a disease. "Construction must cease immediately." I didn't even try to be polite. I just laughed. What else do you do? I told her, "Look, Karen, this land isn't in your HOA. You don't get a vote, and frankly, you don't even get a say." She didn't blink. She just started firing off terms. Architectural harmony, community standards, adjacent parcel review. Like she was reading from a script designed to make normal people panic. She even had the audacity to tell me my crew needed visitor agreements. I showed her the city permits, pointed out that the county had already confirmed the parcel was private, and told her to get off my land. She leaned in, her eyes narrowing, and whispered, "We can have this shut down." It didn't sound like a threat at the time. It sounded like the confused, entitled rambling of a woman who had never heard the word no in her entire life. She drove off in a cloud of dust, and I went back to work, assuming that was the end of it. That was my mistake. I thought it was just a weird neighbor encounter. I didn't realize that weird was over and the sabotage had already begun. 2 days later, our temp power got slapped with a termination notice. The kicker? We weren't even on the grid yet. We were running off our own portable generators. The utility company told me the HOA had filed a formal complaint using my parcel number, claiming a community standards dispute required an immediate shutdown. I stood there in the blistering heat, staring at that orange sticker, and I felt a slow, cold anger creeping up my spine. This wasn't about an HOA president being a control freak anymore. This was fraud. It turned into a war of attrition. Noise complaints before we even turn on a saw. Environmental reports about unauthorized chemical dumping on dirt where we hadn't even started clearing. Then, the police showed up because someone reported suspicious commercial vehicles, which, translated, means they saw a construction crew at a construction site and decided to weaponize the police department against me. At first, the inspectors were cool, just doing their jobs. But then they started noticing the pattern. Same source, same vague, panicky complaints, same HOA. One city official, a guy who'd been around the block, looked at my site, then at the complaint file and muttered, "Your site is actually cleaner than most people's kitchens. But keep your head down." That's the thing about people like Karen. They know they can't beat you with facts, so they try to make your life so miserable that quitting starts to look like the only way to find peace. I'd had enough. I went down to the county recorder's office and pulled every scrap of paper tied to my parcel. That's when the whole thing cracked wide open. A clerk named Daniel, a guy who clearly hated HOA politics as much as I did, helped me dig through the files. We found a zoning overlay request filed by the HOA, claiming they needed to bring my land into some shared buffer zone to keep the aesthetics consistent. And there it was, a consent form signed with my name. Except it wasn't my signature. Not even close. It was a joke. Someone had typed my name into a template and hoped the sheer audacity of it would pass. The notary stamp was a blurry mess. The signature block was crooked, and here's the best part. The supporting document listed a notary who had been dead for 3 years. That was the moment it stopped being a neighborhood dispute and became a criminal investigation. My lawyer stopped being cautious and started being a shark. We reported the forgery, pushed for an injunction, and started keeping a ledger of every single incident. Karen, meanwhile, was losing her mind. One morning, I found garbage dumped along my fence line, ripped bags, broken glass, and, I kid you not, shredded copies of the HOA newsletter used like confetti. Later that day, one of my rental excavators showed up with the side key to the metal and the tires slashed. A deputy came out, looked at the damage, shrugged, and said, "Probably just kids." I wanted to scream. Yeah, officer, local kids are just really invested in zoning law, fraud, and vandalism. I stopped relying on decency right then and there. I installed top-tier cameras, floodlights that could turn night into day, and motion alerts that pinged my phone every time a coyote breathed too hard. I was ready. Then came the twist that Karen never saw coming. When my lawyer took the forged documents to the county attorney's office, a senior investigator named Dana Kessler pulled us into a back office. She didn't look like a bureaucrat. She looked like someone who had been waiting for a reason to throw the book at someone. She opened a massive binder full of screenshots and filings, looked me in the eye, and said, "We've been watching this HOA for a long time. Your case just gave us the key to the vault." It turned out Karen hadn't started with me. She was a professional. She had been using the HOA as a front to bully people out of their land, creating violations until the owners got so fed up they sold out cheap to her partners. I was just the first person who was stubborn enough and had enough cameras to actually nail her to the wall. Other people started coming out of the woodwork. A guy named Mike told me she tried to force him to take down a flagpole because it was an unauthorized vertical structure. An elderly couple came forward, tears in their eyes, because they found out their undeveloped parcel had been listed for pending community acquisition without them ever knowing. It was a systematic land grab, masked by the language of community service. Then she got arrogant. At 1:42 in the morning, 2 men in reflective vests cut my gate chain and slapped a red condemnation sticker on my panel. A few minutes later, Karen herself rolled up, flashlight in hand, walking around my half-built home like she was inspecting conquered territory. She was literally stepping over my equipment, beaming with this sick, satisfied grin. She had no idea that my new cameras were recording every single movement in high-definition infrared. By sunrise, I had the footage, the sheriff had the footage, and the county had the whole damn file. When the deputy watched the video of Karen directing the men to trespass on my property, he just paused the frame, looked at me, and said, "Well, that's bold." Bold? Hell, it was a felony. The collapse was glorious. The county didn't just investigate. They swarmed. They served subpoenas, confirmed my site had 0 violations, and officially declared the condemnation an act of criminal vandalism. The local news picked it up, and the floodgates opened. A week later, deputies showed up at Karen's doorstep with a real warrant. Watching her get dragged out of her house, screaming about how she was the victim, was the kind of cinema you just can't script. Inside her home, they found a gold mine, pre-filled violation slips with my name, maps of land she was targeting for future acquisition, and a flash drive titled Building Freeze Plans. The hearing was 67 days after her arrest. Karen tried to look like a misunderstood, classy homeowner in her beige suit, but the judge wasn't having it. When the video of her trespassing on my land played on the courtroom screen, you could hear a pin drop. Then came the forged forms, the testimony from the neighbors, the emails, the money trail. It was a parade of pure, unadulterated greed. In the end, Karen got exactly what she deserved: fraud, harassment, trespassing, falsification of records, and conspiracy. She got probation, a mountain of community service, and a lifetime ban from any HOA board. The Sun Mesa Ridge Association was dissolved under outside supervision, and the residents were finally reimbursed for all those improper fines they'd been paying for years. I got my damages for the delays, the vandalism, and the legal fees. 2 months later, my house was finished. The porch faces west, just like I planned, and at sunset, the light hits that metal roof and turns the whole place into a cathedral of gold. My workshop smells like cedar shelves and machine oil, and I've got the quietest, most peaceful setup in the desert. I sit out there sometimes, watching the shadows stretch across the cacti, and I think about how close I came to losing it all to someone who genuinely believed that power was just another word for ownership. The lesson is simple, really. Greed doesn't usually show up in a mask with a weapon. It shows up in a pressed white blouse, holding a clipboard, speaking the language of community standards, and betting that you're too tired or too scared to fight back. But paper cuts both ways. Records matter. Boundaries matter. And sometimes, the only thing standing between a bully and your life is your own refusal to blink. At my gate now, there's a small, polished brass sign mounted right under the private property notice. It's small, discreet, and says, "Not part of any HOA." And right under that, in a slightly smaller font, a second line, "Just ask Karen." It makes me smile every time I walk by it. But it does make me wonder, when someone hides theft behind rules and control behind the mask of community, what does actual justice look like to you? Is it just seeing them lose in court, or is there something else that needs to happen to really set the balance right? If you've ever had to deal with an HOA, or some bully in a suit who thought your rights were optional, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment below. Tell me your story, and let's talk about where you draw the line when someone tries to come for what's yours. Because let's be real, sometimes the best way to handle the noise is to make sure your voice is the last one heard. So what's your take? What's the line in your book? Let's get into